something strange is happening at the 2026 World Cup. This was supposed to be the biggest World Cup in history. 48 teams, 104 matches, and more than $30 billion in projected economic impact were expected to deliver a massive boost across the United States. For years, that was the future host cities, businesses, and millions of fans had been looking forward to. But just days after the opening ceremony, the first signs started telling a very different story. And as more data has come in, the gap between what was promised and what's actually happening has become harder and harder to ignore. So what's really going on behind the world's biggest sporting event? And are these just the growing pains of a tournament this massive, or the first signs that a promise worth tens of billions of dollars is already beginning to crack? To understand why the images coming out of the opening days of the 2026 World Cup caught so many people off guard, we have to go back several years to when the United States first began preparing for this tournament. From the moment FIFA confirmed that North America would host the 2026 World Cup, much of the attention quickly shifted to the United States. It wasn't just the country hosting the most matches. It would also stage most of the knockout games and the final itself. For many cities, this was seen as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The World Cup hadn't even started, but the numbers arrived long before the first kickoff. More than $30 billion in projected economic impact, millions of international visitors, tens of thousands of temporary jobs. Those optimistic forecasts quickly became the foundation for investment decisions across the country, from New York and Los Angeles to Dallas, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and Miami. Host cities prepared for a summer they believed would be unlike any in recent memory. Airports drew up plans for a major surge in international arrivals. Transit systems were adjusted to handle visitors coming from every corner of the world. Hotels prepared to hire more staff and expand their capacity. Restaurants stocked up on ingredients, extended their hours, and brought on seasonal workers. Tour companies created travel packages built specifically for soccer fans. Souvenir shops ordered extra inventory. Small businesses also saw this as a rare chance to boost revenue after years of dealing with inflation and rising operating costs. What's interesting is that most of those decisions weren't based on gut feeling. They were built on one very simple assumption. If millions of fans from around the world were coming to the United States, they would need places to sleep, places to eat, ways to get around, and countless other services throughout the tournament. In other words, the World Cup wasn't seen as just a sporting event. It was seen as an economic engine. That's why many local governments committed additional funding for security, transportation, sanitation, and a long list of public services. Roads were reconfigured. Development projects were pushed ahead of schedule. Not because of a 90-minute soccer match, but because of the belief that the wave of international visitors would generate enough spending to more than pay for it all. For months leading up to the tournament, optimism seemed to be everywhere. Report after report talked about the massive influx of visitors. Businesses looked ahead to what they expected would be their busiest summer in years. Cities spoke about the opportunity to showcase themselves to the entire world. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to point to the same conclusion, that the World Cup wouldn't just create unforgettable moments on the field, it would also deliver the biggest economic boost the United States had seen in decades. But history has shown that mega events all have one thing in common. The bigger the expectations, the more closely reality gets examined. And once a few pieces of those projections start drifting off course, the entire picture can change very quickly. That's exactly what is beginning to happen, not on the scoreboard, but in the first wave of data released as the tournament gets underway. Because a World Cup can be a spectacular success on the field, But the promise of an economic boom only holds up if fans are out on the streets, checking into hotels, filling restaurants, and bringing in the spending that everyone was counting on. If you want to know whether that $30 billion promise is actually becoming reality, you don't need to look at the scoreboard. Look at the hotels. Because hotels are usually the first to know the answer. A booked room doesn't just mean one more guest staying overnight. It also means a plane ticket has been purchased, a taxi will be called, a restaurant will have another customer, and local businesses will see more money coming through the door. That's why the hotel industry is often seen as the thermometer for the entire travel economy. And that thermometer has started showing some unusual readings. According to a survey by the American Hotel and Lodging Association, nearly 80% of hotels in host cities said bookings were running below what they had projected before the World Cup. What stood out even more was that many said reservations never produced the surge they had expected, even as the tournament drew near, or had already begun. That wasn't what hotels had prepared for. For months, they believed this would be their busiest summer in years. Room rates were raised. Many hotels introduced minimum stay requirements to maximize revenue. Some even held back their best rooms, convinced that demand would only grow stronger as opening day approached. Based on the forecasts at the time, those decisions made perfect sense. But then the market started sending a very different message. What caught many people off guard wasn't just that fewer visitors showed up than expected. It was FIFA itself. As part of its preparations for the tournament, FIFA reserved large blocks of hotel rooms for national teams, referees, sponsors, and business partners. To many hotels, that looked like clear evidence that demand would be exceptionally strong. But as operational plans changed, rooms that were no longer needed began going back onto the market. In Philadelphia alone, FIFA canceled roughly 2,000 hotel room reservations, putting them back into circulation. In Kansas City, local partners said about 75% of the rooms FIFA had blocked for peak nights were also released just weeks before the tournament. That's when many hotels found themselves in their toughest position. They cut prices. They reopened rooms they had been holding back. But by then, the booking window for most fans had already all but closed, and the hotel business follows one unforgiving rule. An empty seat on a plane can be sold on the next flight. A rental car can go out tomorrow. But a hotel room that sits empty tonight loses its value the moment the clock strikes midnight. You can never sell last night again. That's why what's happening now is no longer just a story about a few hotels with vacant rooms. It's a sign that the forecasting model so many businesses trusted is beginning to show its first cracks. And perhaps more importantly, hotels may simply be the first place where those cracks have become visible. After looking at hotel booking numbers, the next question almost asks itself, if hotel rooms are still sitting empty, where did the fans go? Perhaps the most surprising part is that they never disappeared. They still love the game. They still watch every match. They still wear the jersey of the team they support. Only one thing has changed. They can no longer afford to be in the stands. Imagine a family of 4 in Argentina, England, or Mexico that has dreamed about the World Cup for years. The match schedule is finally released. They sit down at the computer, start making plans, and begin adding up the costs. First come the match tickets, then the international flights. Next, the hotel. Then the flights, or long drives between host cities. Add meals, local transportation, travel insurance, and a long list of unexpected expenses. The strange part is that by then, the match ticket is no longer the biggest expense. The trip itself is. After just a few minutes of doing the math, the total can easily climb into the thousands of dollars for a middle-class family. And for many people, that's where the trip ends. Right there on the computer screen. Not because they changed their minds, not because they love soccer any less, but because the final calculation always leads to the same answer. It's just too expensive. The ticket market has been telling the same story. In the weeks leading up to the tournament, resale prices for some matches dropped noticeably as sellers scrambled to find last-minute buyers. FIFA also opened additional ticket sales close to match days, suggesting that demand in some markets wasn't as strong as originally expected. That creates a striking paradox. The world has never been short on soccer fans. The matches still attract billions of television viewers. Sports bars are still packed every time the ball starts rolling. But the gap between loving the sport and being able to attend a World Cup keeps getting wider. Maybe the saddest part isn't an empty seat in the stadium. It's the millions of fans who are still forced to chase that dream through a television screen. A suitcase still sitting in the corner of the room. A passport without a new entry stamp. A child wearing a brand new jersey, asking their parents when the family will finally get to see a World Cup in person. For many families, the answer is simple: not this year. And perhaps that's the biggest change at the 2026 World Cup. The tournament isn't running out of fans. It's running short of people who can still afford to turn their love of the game into a real trip. The World Cup has never been just 90 minutes of soccer. What makes this tournament unlike any other sporting event is the feeling that an entire city comes alive for the game. Public squares packed with people, cafes filled with cheers, streets covered in team colors and national flags, fans from dozens of different countries singing the same songs, even when they don't speak the same language. That's what millions of people have loved about the World Cup for decades. But when the tournament arrived in the United States, many fans realized they were stepping into a very different experience. Not because soccer had changed, but because the way the event was organized had. Most of the stadiums hosting World Cup matches in the United States were originally built for NFL games, where crowd control and security have always been top priorities. Before even catching a glimpse of the field, many fans have to pass through security barriers, metal detectors, strict bag policies, and long walks from parking lots or transit drop-off points to the stadium gates. Every one of those measures has a purpose. An event that draws millions of people and includes heads of state, FIFA officials, and global sponsors naturally requires an extraordinary level of security. But that's also where the paradox begins. What has always made the World Cup unforgettable was never just the match itself. It was everything that happened before kickoff. Walking through thousands of fellow supporters, random conversations with complete strangers, the drums, the singing, and the feeling that the entire city had turned into a festival for days. When that experience is replaced by security barriers, controlled walkways, and multiple layers of screening, many fans say it no longer feels like they're entering a celebration. It feels like they're moving through a process. That may be why many international reporters have described the atmosphere outside some stadiums as feeling more like a security checkpoint than a soccer festival. Some analysts have also pointed out that having 3 host countries, enormous travel distances, and different security procedures from one venue to another has made the overall experience more complicated than at many previous World Cups. None of those rules are wrong, but when they're all combined, they change the feeling the World Cup has always been known for. And that may be one of the most important takeaways from this year's tournament. The World Cup isn't defined only by what happens inside the stadium. It's also defined by what fans experience before they ever take their seats. And when that entire journey starts feeling more like a security procedure than a street festival, what gets lost isn't just the atmosphere. It's part of the identity that made the World Cup the most beloved sporting event in the world. By this point, the biggest question is no longer why hotels still have empty rooms or why so many fans decided to stay home? It's a much simpler question. If the World Cup is still attracting billions of viewers around the world and is still expected to generate tens of billions of dollars in economic value, then where is all that money actually going? The answer is that the World Cup isn't short on money. It just isn't flowing the way many people imagined. When a fan buys a ticket, watches the matches on TV, purchases an official jersey, or spends money within the tournament's commercial ecosystem, much of that revenue doesn't stay in the host city. It continues flowing to FIFA, broadcasters that own the media rights, global sponsors, and the corporations that control the tournament's commercial partnerships. That's why the World Cup can still generate enormous revenue, even if many local businesses never experience the boom they were expecting. In economics, this is often described by a concept that's worth paying attention to: leakage. Put simply, the money is still being generated, but it quickly leaves the local economy instead of staying behind and creating additional rounds of spending. But that's only half the story. The other half is called displacement. Normally, a city doesn't just welcome soccer fans. It also welcomes vacationers, business travelers, and countless other visitors with completely different reasons for being there. But during the World Cup, many of those traditional travelers deliberately avoid host cities because they expect higher hotel prices, heavier traffic, and tighter security. That creates another paradox. The city welcomes a large wave of soccer fans, but at the same time, it loses regular visitors who would have spent money at museums, neighborhood shops, cafes, and restaurants outside the event areas. Meanwhile, many World Cup fans follow a fairly closed-off travel pattern. From the airport, to the hotel, to the fan zone, into the stadium, then back again. The amount of time they actually spend exploring the city is sometimes much shorter than local businesses had originally expected. That's why a restaurant just a few blocks from the stadium can still have empty tables. A locally owned souvenir shop can still sell less than it does on an ordinary day. And a small business can still miss out on the economic boost it had been waiting years for. Perhaps that's the part people talk about the least. The World Cup is still an enormous revenue machine. FIFA is still selling broadcasting rights. Sponsors are still reaching billions of viewers. Media companies are still drawing record-breaking audiences. But that doesn't automatically mean everyone in a host city is making more money. And that's the biggest difference between a tournament that's commercially successful and one that creates broad economic benefits. Those are not always the same thing. And perhaps that difference is exactly why so many local businesses have started asking whether the promise of a massive economic boost is actually reaching the places where they're standing. After everything we've covered, some people may be ready to jump to a quick conclusion that the 2026 World Cup is failing. But if that's the final takeaway, then perhaps we're looking at the wrong problem. Because if you focus only on what's happening on the field, the World Cup is still delivering exactly what billions of fans hoped it would. Brilliant goals, explosive celebrations, the kind of moments that only soccer can create. When the United States defeated Paraguay 4-1, the final whistle blew to the roar of tens of thousands of fans. The players embraced one another. Supporters sang from the stands. Within minutes, the highlights were appearing on sports broadcasts and social media feeds around the world. That's the story everyone sees. But at that very same moment, there were other scenes that almost no television camera captured. A hotel manager staring at a reservation board that still wasn't full. A restaurant owner waiting for customers they were sure would show up. A souvenir shop closing its doors after another day of disappointing sales. Two stories unfolding in the same city. But only one of them makes it onto television. Maybe that's why it's so easy to confuse the success of a soccer match with the success of an entire economic model. The truth is, soccer was never the problem. The players have done their part. The fans still love the game. The matches are still creating emotions that no other sport can replace. What's being questioned has never been the quality of the World Cup. It's the economic expectations that were built around it. A spectacular goal can put a smile on millions of faces, but it can't make airline tickets cheaper. It can't fill hotel rooms that are still sitting empty. It can't bring more customers through the doors of businesses that spent years getting ready. And it can't undo business decisions that were made long before the first ball was kicked. Perhaps that's the most important point of all. The World Cup didn't create the issues we've been talking about. It simply made them easier to see. It's like the tide pulling back and revealing the rocks that were always hidden beneath the water. Perhaps that's exactly what the 2026 World Cup is doing. It isn't changing the United States in just a few weeks. It's exposing the gap between expectations and reality that many people never noticed before. And perhaps that's why this story was never really about soccer. Because in the end, a spectacular goal can make an entire stadium erupt. But it can't fill a hotel that's still sitting half empty on the other side of the city. Sooner or later, the 2026 World Cup will come to an end. The trophy will be lifted. The greatest goals will be replayed over and over again. New records for global viewership will be announced. And then, one by one, the stadium lights will go dark. The security barriers will come down. The fan zones will close. The crowds will slowly leave the cities. Everything will return to normal. But perhaps that's when the real story of the 2026 World Cup actually begins. Not on the field, but inside meetings at hotels, small businesses, and the cities that placed so much hope in this tournament. The next time a report promises tens of billions of dollars in economic impact, will they believe it the way they once did? The next time a hotel is encouraged to hold back hundreds of rooms for an expected wave of international visitors, will it still be willing to take that gamble? The next time a city is invited to host a global mega event, will the first question still be, how much money are we going to make? Or will it be, where will the money actually go? Perhaps that's what has truly changed after the 2026 World Cup. Not the game, not the fans, but the way people look at big promises. For decades, major sporting events have been seen as an almost guaranteed formula for economic growth. The 2026 World Cup doesn't prove that formula is right, but it doesn't prove it's wrong either. What it has done is force people to ask questions that, until now, very few wanted to ask. Perhaps that's the tournament's greatest legacy. The World Cup didn't change the United States in just a few weeks. It simply made what was already there impossible to ignore under the spotlight of the world's biggest sporting event. And maybe that's what billions of people are really watching. Not just another World Cup, but the moment when faith in economic promises begins to be tested against reality. Because in the end, a trophy can be lifted. A champion can be crowned. But when the cheers begin to fade and the last stadium lights go out, the question that remains won't be which team won the tournament. It will be whether the promises made before the first match ever became reality. Perhaps. That's the story the 2026 World Cup will leave behind long after the final whistle. The 2026 World Cup may still set new global viewership records. The matches will still be played. The goals will still bring millions of people to their feet. And a champion will eventually be crowned. But as the stadium lights begin to fade, what remains may be more than just the final score. It will be the hotels that were counting on a blockbuster summer, the small businesses that bet on a wave of international visitors, and the fans who were forced to watch their dream from a television screen because the cost of making the trip had become too high. Perhaps what is being put to the test isn't the World Cup itself. It's the belief that a global sporting event can automatically deliver an economic miracle. And perhaps that's the story the 2026 World Cup will leave behind long after the memory of any goal scored on the field.